Hi, in this video we're going to be learning about TypeScript, why it's useful, how it's going to increase your productivity, and how to implement it in your React projects. First, I want to start with a couple of pros or advantages of using TypeScript. Number one, the biggest one, is interfaces. This is the main reason why I use TypeScript. Interfaces are like some sort of types. They are not exactly types, but they are, you might as well just consider them types. They let us tell our code what types that we expect from our objects and what their properties should be. So it gives us some sort of like predictability to our code and protects us from some errors and gives us the ability to work with different libraries as long as we specify what we expect. So for example, if I would tell a React component, look, I'm expecting in my props to have a property age that's a number. If we don't pass this property, it's going to complain, and if we're going to pass an age value of John Doe, it's going to be like, no, that's not a number. So it kind of protects us from the little mistakes we can make. Number two is editor support. This is a big one especially for beginners. The IntelliSense and the autocomplete can be really useful at times. Let's say you had a massive interface, and your interface had, let's say it's called user, and it had age, number, age, name, address, and you can just say, when you're creating something of type user, you can just hit Control space and it will tell you, oh, you're expecting a number and you're expecting rather an age, an address, all this stuff. So it's really cool. The autocomplete can be useful. Number three is it's a JavaScript superset. If you've read anything about TypeScript, you would have heard about people referring to it as a JavaScript superset, because that's what it is. You're essentially just writing JavaScript plus some other stuff, which is really cool. What's cool about it, you can just write JavaScript the way you did it and add some things on the top. Of course, we have static type checking. Now, JavaScript is dynamically typed, even though under the hood, really in JavaScript, there are types, but they're just not enforced in the language itself. But in TypeScript, in a lot of cases, you have to specify your types to protect yourself against certain runtime errors. Now, I have to mention a couple of not disadvantages necessarily, but I would say these are situational cons. Number one is extra code. You have to write some extra code when you're typing TypeScript, and that can be a bit of a hassle at the beginning. And you have to specify types. You have to add some code for your React components. You have to write some interfaces for your props and state. It can be a bit of a hassle at the beginning. Number two is that it can be unnecessary for small projects, to be honest. If you have like a small project and you have just a couple of components and you know the type of data that you're handling, then I don't think it's necessary. The TypeScript is labeled as the JavaScript that scales, and it's made for bigger applications. And it can be a bit annoying to get into, because at the beginning you don't know what the types of some of the variables or objects that you're using. You have to Google sometimes some types, and you have to install some types libraries to run certain frameworks. All right, enough of the theory. So let's start actually implementing it with React. I'm assuming you already have Node.js installed to use npm and create React app as well. If not, go ahead and install those. Let's go here on the desktop, and I'm going to open up a terminal window. I'm going to say create-react-app. I'm going to call it ts-react. And here we need to add the flag TypeScript. So --TypeScript, which will now scaffold this as a TypeScript React application by installing the normal React dependencies plus installing the TypeScript types. And I'll be back once this is done. Okay, now that it's done installing, we can just close this and open this in VS Code. And off the go, we get this tsconfig file, which specifies a couple of things for the linter, for the TypeScript linter, and this config file has gone so much better in the recent months. It used to be much more strict, and you can edit this to your level of strictness that you want. You can Google TypeScript linter and tsconfig and customize it however you want. I'm gonna leave it as is for now. If you can see in the package JSON, we have the usual dependencies plus these types. Now you're gonna come across a lot of types using TypeScript, because whenever you use a library, you need to go along and install the types if it's not written already in TypeScript. So let's go to our source folder, and as you see here, our usual files are now TSX instead of JavaScript, which just changes the way the editor, IntelliSenses them. I'm gonna remove this logo because we're not gonna use it. I'm gonna remove all of this inside the app. I'm gonna use a component, and what I want to do for this is just a simple search thing. If you look at the Poke API, we just use this URL, this endpoint or base URL, and we add /Pokemon / the name of the Pokemon we want. I'm gonna get a bunch of data, like we can go to Postman. Here I've already searched for Bulbasaur, and what I'm interested in is abilities and base experience, and of course you can extend it however much you want. I want to as well get the picture of this Pokemon, and I think this is in sprites. Yeah, so sprites here, if you look at front default, if I click on this, it gives me a picture of Bulbasaur. So I'm gonna try to extract these 4 things and show them on the app. Alright, so here I'm gonna put a component which we haven't created yet. I'm gonna call it Pokemon Search. And off the go, it's already with a red squiggly saying we can't find it. In JavaScript, it wouldn't complain until you run, but here it complains because this doesn't exist actually. So let's remove this logo and let's say import Pokemon Search from. I'm gonna put this in components. So components. Yeah, we haven't created that folder yet. /Pokemon Search. Let's create a folder called components, and here we'll create Pokemon search.tsx. Alright, we can still use the normal TypeScript or React snippets. So RCE is going to create a class-based component, and here I want to get some details about whoever's using this. So I want to get their name and how many Pokemons they have, and we can pass these from here. So, but how we gonna pass them as props, but in TypeScript we need to specify the type of props. So here if I hover over a component, it tells me that I can give the type of the props and the state, so the P and S. So here I can do like this, and I can say that the type of my props will have a name, and it's gonna be a string, and then a number of Pokemons, which is gonna be a number. So now I can go here, and here there's already a red line saying like, oh, you didn't give what this component is expecting. So here I need to say name, and let's say this is John Doe, and the number, and this is cool, it already suggests what we need, which is really cool. I can just press enter, and here let's say John has 5 Pokemons, and now all those red lines go away, and now I can actually compile and run my app. So let's run npm start, and it runs without any problems. And actually we're not doing anything with these props yet, so let's actually do that. I'm gonna put this div back to what it was, and here I'm gonna have a paragraph saying user. I'm gonna use the props. So let's actually extract first those properties. So I'm gonna destructure them. So say const name and number of Pokemons, and they're already suggested for me. And we're gonna get them from this.props. And here we will say user and concatenate the name. And here we can say has and concatenate number of Pokemons and say Pokemons. Let's save and let's go to our app. Cool, it says user John Doe has 5 Pokemons, which is the data that we gave. Now let's say we don't want to, like maybe user has no Pokemons and doesn't give us like a number. So we can actually make this, so right here, we can make it optional. And we can as well change this. Let's say we need this type of props in other components. We can make this more modular by putting the interface here, or actually just having it in a folder on its own so we can use it in other components. So let's create a folder called interfaces. And I like to use, so let's call this user. I like to use this convention by adding the extension interface. So interface, so user.interface.ts, and here I just want to export that interface. So let's say export default interface, and this is the user, and here we're gonna have a name. So the same as we did, name of that's a string, and here we will have the number of Pokemons, which is a number. Now we can make this optional by adding a question mark here. So here what we can actually just omit this and not have a number of Pokemons, and it's still gonna be fine. Actually I need to bring this in first. So here let's say import user from, we go back one level to interfaces / user.interface. And here we can just say that the props are of type user, like this. And now this wouldn't complain that we omitted the number of Pokemons because it's optional. And here we can do, so let's just take all of this and cut it, or like all of this, and we can check. So because if we don't have them, it's going to be null. What we need to do, we can say number of Pokemons, number of Pokemons. So if this exists, then we can just return this, and actually we need to wrap it in a span. It's not spawn, span, and put all of this. So if we have a number of Pokemons, we show that. If not, we don't. So let's save all files. And here it just says user John Doe, and if I go back and add the number of Pokemons, it will say has 5 Pokemons. Cool. So let's now add an input field where we can search for a Pokemon and see results. So let's go to our Pokemon search, and under this paragraph I'm going to put an input of type text, and I'm not gonna use the controlled component. I'm gonna use a reference instead to find this input and submit the data. So the reference will be this dot, let's call it Pokemon reference, ref, like this. And it's gonna complain because this variable doesn't exist yet. And here we're gonna have a button. It's gonna have an on click, and let's call this dot on search click, and let's give it a class so we can style it. My button, and here we'll say search. Let's go to the app CSS. I just want to override the we don't need these actually, and the logo stuff. I just want to override the basic button style. So here I'm gonna say dot my button, and I'm just gonna give it some border. So 1 pixel solid. I'm just gonna say blue, and just give it a background. Where is it? Background of, or background color rather, of just white. All right, let's go back to the component. Now we need to create this on search click, and we need to initialize this Pokemon reference. So here I'm going to say Pokemon ref. I need to give it a type. So this will be the react.reference object. This is going to be of type HTML. What is it? HTML input element. And don't freak out, I don't just know this. You can go Google all your reference types and stuff like this and initialize them. Here it says property Pokemon ref has no initializer. Yeah, so we need to actually initialize, we can't just leave it just declared like that. So in the constructor, so let's have a constructor, and this will take a props, and our props are of type user. And inside the constructor, which is gonna call super props. And here we need to initialize our Pokemon reference. So this dot Pokemon reference, and we need to say it's a React. It's called React.create reference, and now this will initialize it as a React reference. And now we need to have some state because we need to store some variables after we search for a Pokemon. So let's say this dot state equals, and here we're gonna have the details that we need from the Pokemon search. So like the name of the Pokemon, and we're gonna initialize this to be empty. We're also gonna get the number of abilities, and we're gonna set this to initially to be null, and the base experience, set this to null initially, and we're gonna need the image URL. We'll call it image URL. It's the front sprite thing, which is gonna be actually not the type, an empty string, and we need to actually give the state a type. So here we're gonna create another interface. Let's call this interface. Let's call it search state, and this will have the name, which is gonna be a string. It's gonna have the number of abilities, which is gonna be a number. I'm gonna have the base experience, which is gonna be a number, and we're gonna have the image URL, which is gonna be a string as well. And here we just add a comma and we say search state. Okay, it says null is not assignable to type number. Let's just assign them 0 for now. Doesn't really matter. Here we need to create this on search click. So let's create that. So on search click, it's not gonna take anything, and it's gonna, so we need to get the value that's inside of the input. So we have a reference to it. We can say const input value equals this dot Pokemon reference dot current dot value, and this is just React stuff. Here it complains, it says object is possibly null. Okay, so I know to get around this. This is a TS-lint problem. We can just add a key here saying what is it, strict null checks. This makes sure that we don't have any value that could be null. We can just set this to false because in our state we don't have any way of knowing, so we could just set it to false, and this should be gone. Actually, I misspelled it here. It's lowercase u. Okay, that warning is gone now, so we can actually carry on. So here we can now send a request to our API to the API endpoint. So I'm going to use the fetch method, which is just JavaScript, and do backticks to have a template string and say https/. Actually, I'm just going to copy it from Postman. So it's this endpoint. And here we need to concatenate the what we inputted. So here we do $ curly braces input value, and here we say .then we're gonna have a result. And here the way fetch works is that if we don't have a successful result, it doesn't go to the catch. So we need to have a check for it. We'll do if result.status does not equal 200. Then we just set so we just do this dot set state, and we need to set an error. So set error to true, and actually we need to add this error property. So here for our state we might have an error. So let's say error of type boolean, and we need to initialize it. By default the error is false. And here we set error to true. We also need to return. Now, else if we don't have an error, we need to say res.json, which as well returns a promise. So we need to chain a .then here, and we can chain a .then here, but it's gonna cause a problem if we don't have an error. It's just gonna proceed and cause a problem. So we need to chain the .then right here, and here it's gonna return us some data. And inside of here, now if we have, when we have the data, we need to bind it to the state data. We need to say this dot set state, and here we also need to set the error to false in case it was true. And here we need to set the name to data.name and the number of abilities to data.abilities. We get an array of abilities, so we access the number of abilities by doing data.abilities.length. And we also need the BaseExperience, BaseExperience, and this will be data.base_experience, and this is in the API, by the way, if you're wondering where I'm getting these from. And we need the image URL, which is going to be data.sprites front default. Yeah, this is it. All right, so now we need to show them in our actual in our markup. So here we can we need to destructure them from the state. So actually, if we do the equals this dot state, and we go back here, we do a control space, and we get actual autocomplete, which is cool. So we need the error, and we need the name, the number of abilities, what else? Base experience, not base, base experience, and the image URL. There's a problem with name. Oh, because of course there's a conflict in variables. So this we can say, we can name it user name like this, and then give user name right here like that. So now we're gonna have a dynamic markup here in case we have an error. So here let's say result markup, and up here we need to say we need to initialize let result markup, and we can actually leave it without a type here. So it's not that it's not that strict that it always requires us to specify types. Now here we first check if we have an error, because if we only check if we have one of these things, then we might have both. So we check if we have an error, then we say result markup equals, just have a paragraph, and we say Pokemon not found, please try again. Else, let's say result markup equals, and here let's do a div, let's have an image, and the source of the image will be the image URL. Alt will be, let's just say Pokemon. Let's give this a class name of Pokemon image, and I give this some styling. And here we'll have a paragraph. Oh, there's a problem here. Oh, it's because I didn't close the string. Oops. Alright, so here in the paragraph we need to say name of the Pokemon has, and concatenate the number of abilities, so number of abilities, and say abilities, and we need to say the base experience, so and base experience, and say base experience points. Alright, I want to style the image. I'm just going to give it some margin, so here let's say img.pokemon image, give it a margin top of 20 pixels and a margin bottom of 10 pixels. Alright, let's save all files and let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we already get this. Oh, it's because we already have some details, like some initialized details. Well, what we need to do, actually we need to encapsulate all of these in a certain type as well. So what's cool about this, we can as well nest interfaces. So here we can say interface Pokemon. So this is what a Pokemon would have, and it would have these properties right here. So we can just cut them and paste them here, and our state will have a Pokemon of type Pokemon, like this. And here we instead of putting this stuff here, we can just say our Pokemon is initially null. And when we get here, when we get the details, we can cut all of these and say Pokemon and give all these properties. And now we need to extract these from Pokemon. So here we can say Pokemon and put all of these inside of there. And here what we need to do, so if error, else if Pokemon, or else if this.state.Pokemon, and now we shouldn't get that data. Cannot read property name of null. Actually, let's just get the Pokemon and then access its properties. So here we can just add Pokemon at the start of all of these. So Pokemon dot. Alright, cool. We don't get that markup. I don't know what was that about. Alright, so now we can search for Pokemon. So let's say Pikachu of type search. Cool, we get the image and we get has without an E, has those abilities. And if we just type something, some nonsense, it should say Pokemon not found, please try again. And if we try, I don't know, some other Pokemon, Snorlax. If we type search, cool, we get Snorlax's image and the number of abilities and everything. So what's cool about this is that if we make a typo right here, URLs, it's gonna flag it immediately. We don't have that on the type Pokemon, which is cool. So we don't have to run and then run into runtime errors. And we can as well have types for our functions, guys. So this doesn't return anything, but you can even be more strict and say void like this. And what's cool is that you can create some functions, let's say, or methods. I'm gonna create a method called add numbers. And I want this method to take two numbers and add them. So A of type number and B of type number, and B can't repeat an argument. So here we just say return A plus B. Now we can strictly say, we can still here say return like hello world, which is cool. But if we say here that it has to return a number, it's gonna complain now. So we can make our code more safe and more scalable by having all these type safety mechanisms implemented throughout our code, so we can scale up without having to worry about these little weird runtime errors and little mistakes. Anyway, you can expand the functionality of TypeScript and make your project so much more type safe, I guess, and more productive by having all these cool functionalities. I think it's a cool technology that everyone should learn. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot. If you liked this video, like it. If you didn't like anything, if you didn't like, by the way, this theme that I created for myself, tell me, I'll revert back to the classic dark plus. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.